When I went to Temple University many, many moons ago, way back in the 50s, there was somebody who was running the show back there. Many of you will remember his name was John Roberts. He was running the broadcast department. And an ex-New York Times reporter and editor by the name of Perry was running the other department in print journalism. Well, if you're a broadcast pioneer, you know what's been happening to journalism. You know how the whole world of journalism, as far as print journalism, has been decimated. Today, we're going to find out what's really happening. We're going to learn about the backstory, and we're going to learn about one of the great journalism schools in this area, what they're doing about it. So I'd like to introduce David Boardman, Dean of the School of Media Communications at Temple University. Previously, he was executive editor and senior vice president of the Seattle Times, the largest news organization in the Pacific Northwest. Under his leadership, the Times won 4 Pulitzer Prizes. Those included the 2012 Pulitzer in Investigative Reporting for a series revealing the state policies that led to hundreds of unnecessary drug overdose deaths. In 2010, the Times won the Pulitzer in Breaking News, presented for print and online coverage of the assassination of 4 police officers. In previous years, Mr. Boardman directed an investigation of abuses in the federal tribal housing program, which won the 1997 Pulitzer for investigative reporting. And his list of accomplishments go on and on. On a personal level, he's married to Barbara Winslow Boardman, a writer and editor. They have 2 daughters. He enjoys kayaking, hiking, yoga, reading, cooking, wine, travel, music, and playing with his golden retriever, and hopes Northwestern will make it into the NCAA basketball tournament before he dies. Mr. Boardman.
Thanks for having me, and I was hoping actually that the clairvoyant would appear before me because she could just tell you what I was going to say, and it'd be easy. It really is an honor and pleasure to be here. Since I came to Philly a year and a half ago, I've heard so much about this group, had the pleasure to meet Jerry and some others, and we're so appreciative of the wonderful things that Broadcast Pioneers does for all of the education community here in the area, but in particular for Temple's School of Media and Communication and the scholarships that you sponsor. So thank you so much for that. So I'm now the dean of that fine institution, and prior to ascending to that ivory tower, if you can call the campus in North Philadelphia an ivory tower, I was an ink-stained wretch 3,000 miles from here, as most recently as the editor-in-chief of the Seattle Times, and before that, almost every job that could be done in a newspaper. Worked there for 30 years. I thought I'd share a little bit about how I see the newspaper business and journalism these days, why I left it to come here, what's happening at Temple, and I thought I'd also take the opportunity to share with you some of my impressions as a newcomer to Philadelphia and the media scene here after a year and a half. So first, let me tell you a little bit about my time at the Seattle Times and what it's like to be the editor of a newspaper in America these days. As the editor of the Times, that meant I was also the editor of our website, seattletimes.com, as well as our tablet app, our iPhone app, our Android app, our Kindle feed, our Facebook pages, our Twitter feeds, our Pinterest page, our videos, our podcasts, our live chats, our staged events, our ebooks, the electronic news ticker that went around our building, and as I used to tell the readers, I'd come deliver their paper and read it to them over their breakfast cereal if that's what it took them to subscribe. Some of you probably know Bill Marimo and Mike Days, the guys who are running the newspapers here. And as they'll tell you, running a paper is dramatically different than it was when we all started. And the same is true, I'm sure, for news directors of television and radio stations as well. You know, it is the most challenging time in the profession of journalism, but in many ways it's also one of the most exciting. There's all this valuable news and information out there, more news and information available to consumers than ever in our lifetimes. And at the same time, there's a lot more meaningless noise out there, as you know. You know, there's more opportunity for us to connect across all the fault lines of race and age and economics and religion and political perspective, yet the way it seems to be playing out, those faults just keep getting wider and wider. The technical tools of our trade in all of these communication businesses, this is the key one right now. And in that form, you put that into the hands of hundreds of millions of people, and they can do a lot of magic with it. They can, as they did in Tunisia and in Egypt, you know, call people to the streets and overthrow a government without violence. They can, here in this country, gather thousands of signatures on an internet petition and force the Bank of America to cancel a planned debit card fee that was going to be a ripoff for people. They can elevate a single incident in Ferguson, Missouri into the point of a lot of important national discussion and debate. And as we saw just a couple of weeks ago, they can reveal exaggerations and probably or perhaps fabrications by the nation's most respected news anchor. But those same tools, that same smartphones have been used to falsely spread a lot of rumor and a lot of mistruth. It's been used to report on the deaths of people that turned out to be alive, from former Vice President Dick Cheney to actor Kevin Bacon, another Philadelphian. They've been used to disseminate the so-called truth about President Obama's allegiance to Islam. They've been used by teenagers to bully and embarrass their gay classmates, and even leading some of them to commit suicide. I have a friend who was a newspaper editor like I and went into the academy, and she says, we used to have a shortage of voice, but we had lots of reporting. Now we have an abundance of voices, but a shortage of reporting. And I think that really describes where we are in the news business and in journalism right now. So as for the newspaper business, and I know most of you, almost all of you, come from the broadcast side of things, you know, why should you care? Does the future of newspapers really matter to our society and to our communities? You know, as you know, living here in the birthplace of the U.S. Constitution, the press is the only industry that's specifically called out in that document for protection. And it wasn't because the founding fathers loved reporters. Believe me, they didn't. But they knew that the freedom of the press was essential for the survival of this new democracy. Thomas Jefferson famously and eloquently said, "Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." So today I might argue that a healthy press is at least as essential as it was 240 years ago, given this complex and complicated world in which we live. And this is a really important point. For me, it doesn't really matter whether the mode of delivery of the journalism is ink on paper or electrons to your tablet or your phone or over the cable or the broadcast airwaves. In fact, you know, I personally believe that the 7-day-a-week printed paper delivered to your doorstep, I think that's a short-lived thing. Enjoy it while you can, but I really believe that will largely be gone, with maybe a few exceptions. But in most cities, that'll be gone within 5, 6, 7 years. We may see a once a week sort of super paper that's delivered on the weekends, and then high quality products during the week, or we may see no printed paper at all. So it's not so much the newspaper that I'm that interested in preserving, but it's the notion of a large professional newsroom, sizable collection of skilled, trained professionals who are dedicated to serving their communities with quality, verified journalism. In fact, I would say that a local newspaper's role as the town square of news and information has never been more important than it is now. You know, as you know, we live in an age where increasingly people are climbing into their own information silos, these echo chambers where they just hear other people who think exactly like they do. The best description I've heard on the state of the media and news in particular these days is this: Americans these days use the media the way a drunk uses a lamppost, for support, not illumination. You know, you can watch Fox's coverage, and I'm talking on the national network. You can watch Fox cover an event and then flip over to MSNBC on the same event. You think these were two different worlds entirely. Your head will be spinning. You know, in that world, I would say, you know, quality local journalism, quality newspapers, quality local television, those really need to stand out as community beacons and a place where people can come together, where there can be some shared facts. And then we can debate from there, but you need to have some basic facts that we all can accept as the starting point. And certainly newspapers, I think, are a key. In most cities, and it's certainly the case here in Philadelphia, the large news gathering force that a newspaper represents, and even at its reduced size, the newsroom of the Inquirer, Daily News, and Philly.com, there are more journalists in that newsroom than in all the television stations combined. A study by the Pew Center a few years ago found that even with the proliferation of digital and cable sources, about 90% of local news actually begins with the newspaper. I've had lots of broadcast friends here in Seattle, or here in Philly and in Seattle, tell me that their shifts began by picking up the paper, or in this day, you know, going to Philly.com and seeing what that army of reporters had to say. But can any of that really survive in today's world? You know some of the bad news. Print advertising revenue for newspapers is at its lowest level since 1950. And in 1950, the population in the United States was less than half what it is now, and the economy was 1/7 what it is now. So since 2000 alone, print advertising has dropped 75% for newspapers. The number of people who actually read a daily printed newspaper has dropped to under 25% of the population now, and that's down from about 75% in the 60s. And as a result of those two things, about a third of all the jobs in newspaper newsrooms have disappeared. Just in the last decade, 16,000 journalism jobs in newspapers in the last decade. But there are some glimmers of hope. You know, while printed paper circulation and readership have declined, the overall consumption of news and information, particularly online, is skyrocketing. You know, people are, as you all know, I mean, just, you know, look on anywhere you go, people are locked into these phones, and a lot of it is chatting with their friends, but a lot of it is through, particularly through social media, going and reading news stories that they're sent by their friends. Many newspapers, and most notably the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and some local papers, like the one I came from in Seattle, have had some real success in establishing paywalls behind which you can't access the copy, the stories, the photographs, the videos, unless you are a subscriber. And you usually pay a lesser fee to be a digital subscriber. And then digital advertising, particularly on mobile, is really starting to pick up, although you know, those are pennies on the dollars that newspapers used to make in print. And then the best thing I think that's happening is after years of corporate consolidation that was marked by just obscene profit taking. I mean, these papers used to just they used to print money. It used to really be a license to print money. Now we're seeing a lot of these local papers bought up by some very wealthy local businessmen who seem genuinely interested in preserving newsrooms as community assets. And these guys actually, many of them have deep enough pockets to make the sort of investments to really reinvent the business. We're seeing that in Washington, D.C., where Jeff Bezos from Amazon bought the paper. We're seeing it in Boston and Minneapolis. And certainly we're seeing it right here in Philadelphia with Jerry Lenfest. So the determination is there, but I would say these new owners will succeed only if they can bring an army of bright and ambitious and innovative young people who have the right values about journalism and the right technology skills into the mix. And that's where schools like Temple come in, and that's why I made the jump. You know, I ran one of the most innovative newsrooms in America, and we were chosen by the AP as the Innovator of the Year a couple of years ago. But I still had to spend most of my time in those last few years, you know, cutting budgets, cutting jobs, looking for nickels rolling around the newsroom floor. And at Temple, I'm surrounded by faculty members in a variety of disciplines, not only in journalism, but in what we call media studies and production and strategic communication and advertising. People who are really interested in finding new models for journalism and communication and media. And I'm surrounded by Temple students who are just absolutely fearless about this digital future. As uncertain as it is. By the time they've come to school, they've already run the gauntlet of their parents, their next door neighbors, their aunts and uncles. Everybody's saying, oh, you don't want to do that. Go into computer science, or, you know, go be a lawyer. But, you know, they're there because they love this. And these young people know, they know what's ahead of them, and they're excited, and they believe that they'll invent a new and successful future for news and journalism. One that allows more personal choice and more interaction, more diversity, more depth, and ultimately more profit than what's seen now. So I believe them. And I urge you to keep supporting them through your scholarships, through internships, jobs, networking, connections that you can make. We happen to have a Temple student at my table right here in the middle who shows the sort of initiative. She just shows up at this thing on her own to meet people and to network, and that's very typical of Temple. Last year, we had a young woman who was a full-time journalism student, and she was a member of the rowing team. She was an editor on the Temple News. She was a full-time student. So she'd get up at like 4 in the morning, go to the Schuylkill, do her rowing practice, then go to class. Then a couple days a week, she'd jump on the Bolt bus, and she'd go to Washington, D.C., where she had a part-time job with the McClatchy News Service. So while she's a full-time student at Temple, she breaks the story of the CIA spying on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Not bad. And a few months after she graduated, she's working as a national security reporter for the Huffington Post. So I think that's very typical of the Temple spirit. And, you know, from what I've seen in my first year and a half here, that's typical of the Philadelphia spirit. And in my last few minutes, I'd like to just share a few observations about my adopted city, which I have to say I'm liking, and more importantly, my wife is liking way more than we expected to. So after I'd been here a couple of months, I wrote a column for the Sunday Inquirer some of you might have seen, and the lead of it was, "Yo, Philly, I want to tell you something about yourselves you might not want to know. You're nice." We're really finding that, you know, despite the tough as nails reputation of Philadelphia, that the people here are surprisingly warm and friendly. And I know that's not the national image, but it really is true. I tell my friends in Seattle, you know, the people here are way more likely to flip you off, but they're also way more likely to say, "Hey, buddy, you look lost," and then walk you 8 blocks somewhere, and then invite you over to dinner by the end of the conversation. So yeah, we're really, really enjoying that. You really do have amazing restaurants here. So did Seattle, and the difference is in Seattle, the best restaurants were seafood and Asian, and here they're Italian and farm to table, which is why I'm carrying 10 more pounds than I was when I moved here. I've never seen such confusing and confounding parking signs as you have in the city of Philadelphia. 2-hour parking, except on Wednesdays between 3 to 6. And by the way, this is only for handicapped people. You know? And now I know why they make them so confusing, because in the year and a half I've been here, I've had more parking tickets than in the 30 years that I lived in Seattle. I'm a big college basketball fan, as you may have gathered from the intro, and it's fun to be at a school that might actually make the tournament. But it's also interesting to me, why does nobody talk about college basketball? It's such a great college basketball town, but it's just Eagles, Eagles, Eagles all the time. And nobody ever talks about basketball. And please, let's not talk about this year's Super Bowl to a guy from Seattle. You know, it's fun to be here at a time of such tremendous ascension of the city. I mean, it just feels like Philadelphia is like the coolest place on earth right now, and people are really starting to notice. And that, I think, is great. I do think there are some things here that a newcomer can see that maybe some of you don't see. And in fact, within the first few weeks, I called my friend who's the editor of the Inquirer, and I said, you know, I've never seen so much loose trash on the street as I see in Philadelphia. And I've been to all 50 states, many cities. If I were the next mayor, that's the first thing I'd do is pick up the garbage. You know, I just think it's like sociology 101. On the media front, people like to complain that the newspapers are not what they used to be here, but I'll tell you, they're still pretty damn good newspapers, and they're a lot better than most cities. And I would say, you know, very much the same about your local television here. You know, again, it may not be what you remember at the height, but they're still very good local television stations. They do a phenomenal job of covering breaking news in particular. And they, too, are having to not only produce a television cast, but they're having to produce a website. I've been struck by how little investigative reporting they do, though, compared to some other cities, and I would hope that they'd pick up on that. There are some things that happen here that make no sense to me at all, and people just explaining them as the way we've always done things here in Philadelphia. And the one I really want to call out is this thing called the Pennsylvania Society, you know, where hundreds of the richest and most powerful people in Pennsylvania go up to New York City 2 weeks before Christmas to scratch each other's backs and cut deals in back rooms and do all their Christmas shopping in another state. And I'm like, what's up with that? I mean, that would be like a front page scandal in Seattle. One other thing I totally don't get, Scrapple. Yeah, just don't get it. So that all said, I mean, it really is an amazing time to be here, a time of great change and progress in Philly. Philly's ascendant. I would tell you, so is Temple University. Our applications are going through the roof. All over the country and all over the world, we're getting students applying. Urban is now cool, so Temple's cool, and I feel really lucky to be there. So thanks again for welcoming me to your city. Thanks for having me here, and I look forward to working with you all in the years to come.
Next, we are going to turn to the world of TV, national TV. And we're going to introduce Howard Blumenthal. He's CEO of Channel 35, a national television producer, author, and educator. He was raised in New York City and nearby suburbs, the son of author and concentration producer Norm Blumenthal, and the grandson of radio and music retailer Harry Blumenthal. He's best known as co-creator and producer of the Peabody Award-winning PBS series, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? In his early years, Howard worked as a publicist for Warner Brothers Records and as a music journalist for Rock, Circus, and Crawdaddy. He also worked on the production and research staff of ABC game shows, The Big Showdown, and Money Maze. In 1976, he headed a team of Warner Brothers that led to the creation of cable channels MTV, Nickelodeon, and the Movie Channel. And I just learned, I hope I got that right, because you whispered in my ear, and one of my ears doesn't work.
Join the club.
Yes, I believe your company has just been accepted as a finalist in the New York Film Festival. Did I hear that right? Okay, it's working. Okay, and finally, in 2002, with Ari Schwartz, Howard founded New Century Television, an early entry in internet video. Since 2005, he served as CEO of Independence Media, an independent public television company in Philadelphia, which emphasizes 5-minute learning programs covering a wide variety of topics, and known as Channel 35 Mind TV. While serving as CEO of Mind, he also served as executive director of the New Jersey Television Network and president of NJN Foundation. Howard Blumenthal.
Two things are happening today. One of them is our program that we did with the Germantown Fred School and the HMS School for Cerebral Palsy. A documentary called On the Other Side of the Fence has been picked up for national distribution. So a very Philadelphia story. And today is the delivery date, made more complicated by hospitals and cold weather and all the things that happen when you work in production. But we're thrilled about that. But the other email that I just got, which is why I'm holding my phone, so this happened just minutes ago, I'll see if I can find it for you, the film has been accepted as a medal finalist in the International Film Festival of New York. So we're competing against in our category, Voice of America, Condé Nast Entertainment, Sky News, CNN, ESPN, and us. Good company, right? Pretty exciting. So we'll see what happens. So I wasn't going to talk about much of that, but we're really proud of this On the Other Side of the Fence documentary and encourage you to take a look. Right now it's still online, the whole of it, and we'll be taking that off and then putting it on the air in dozens of markets, maybe a little more than that, sometime in the spring. So there's that. Where I was going to start before all the craziness of production happened today was to sort of say, hey, to how lucky I've been. I started out at NBC watching my dad when I was a real little kid. So I watched Johnny Carson rehearse, we were talking about that, and just about every game show and everything else that happened at what was then the RCA building in New York, and had only the vaguest notion that television also happened in other places. So I knew there was this place, Philadelphia. I knew they had a Liberty Bell, maybe. I'm like 8 years old. But I wasn't sure, like, did they have an RCA building too? And were they producing all the same kind? I just had no idea what was here. And of course, there's this whole rich history, and now I'm looking at a lot of the faces who made that history. But it was just non-existent. It wasn't on my radar at all. We didn't know that was happening. My first experience in another place, if you will, because it was very much of a New York culture, coming out of the world of NBC and ABC game shows and the like, there was this notion that cable television might have a future, but nobody was real sure where it was going to go or what might happen. And a group of young crazy people who didn't know how to take no for an answer were hired by then Warner Communications, now Time Warner, and were given a list of things to do, and among them was invent some new television networks. My father said, "You're crazy, you're going to get blamed." But out of that came MTV, and I can legitimately say that I wrote the first business plan, got the first money, and produced the first pilot. So that was a lot of fun. And also headed production at Nickelodeon. And what that taught me, to jump over a whole lot of years, is that you can do it. That the rules are really there as guidelines. And if you want to figure out how the rest of the story is going to play out, more or less you got to write it yourself. So I've become very interested in learning, in particular, how children learn and how adults learn, and where media intersects with that. So that I got my first opportunity to do something about that when I was hired by then WGBH and WQED in Pittsburgh to create and produce a television program based upon this Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego computer software. So I got the phone call, and I'm thinking, and I'm actually sitting at a restaurant pre-cell phones, and the waiter, the server actually brought the phone to the table. I'd never done that. I wasn't that important. And the instant that they told me what the project was, I knew it was a home run, and I knew it would be changing my life, and sure enough, it did. Fortunately, it changed some other people's lives, too. It became enough of a hit that the tour jacket, remember we also had tour jackets in the 90s with big emblazoned logos on the back. I wore one on a New Jersey Transit train coming back from New York, and the entire car started singing the theme song to me. I wanted to crawl under the seat, and I realized I probably couldn't wear that jacket publicly anymore. That's how much of a hit it was. So it was great fun, but the important thing there was the first day, was the day after Labor Day. I figured, well, I'm being hired to teach kids about geography and world cultures. I guess you start with an atlas. So I opened up my big National Geographic atlas to the first page. By the third page, I realized this is never going to work. We're going to have to go in a different direction to somehow encourage kids to learn. And that was really the beginning of my understanding that you really have to meet people where they are and then lift and open the curtain and do all those things, all those metaphors we use. So I started talking to kids. And in fact, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego was developed in Bucks County, which is where I live. And we went to school after school after school and said, what do you know about France? What do you know about Germany? What do you know about England? And we were surprised not only in how little the kids knew, we were surprised how little the teachers knew. Why? Because there really wasn't a training program. So we're asking folks to go from here to way up there without really providing the scaffolding that was necessary. So that sort of ignited my interest in the way we teach, the way we learn, how schools are set up, what media is providing as information, where news fits into that, where documentaries fit into that, and where entertainment fits into that, because entertainment tends to be about our best teacher. We know much more, all of us, about the criminal justice system in the United States because we watch crime dramas on television than anything else, right? So, we now know how an autopsy is done. I'm not sure I wanted to know that, but now we know, and we've seen all sorts of bodies. So I started thinking about that more and more, and then my heart was really in television production, went back into New York, got my old Carmen gang together again. We produced some shows for History Channel and Food Network, et cetera. And one of them was a very, very successful series of specials called the Great American History Quiz, in which we were allowed to take a look at American history and make fun of it, have fun with it, do things that would attract people's attention. And to our utter delight, we had 250 celebrities, including Bill and Hillary Clinton and others who read what we wrote. And they became very, very successful specials, and they also became books. But what was important for me is, wow, you can take the information and have a lot of fun with it and still bring about a fair amount of learning. Fast forward. Now I'm on the board of directors of a public television station here, Channel 35, which you guys would know as WYBE, I think, which, by the way, was the starting place for Sesame Street in the early tests. There's a good bit of asterisk of history there. And we had the opportunity to turn this station into something else, not a PBS member station, great opportunity to invent something new. So, and Jeff was there for a fair amount of this. We figured, why not use a short format? Because people are starting to be able to make their own television, and we'll teach them how. We'll show them how to edit, but more important, we'll teach them how to tell stories about their community. Well, 1,000 videos later, we've worked with probably over 100 nonprofit organizations. We've had hundreds of people in for boot camps that we've been running regularly. We've really helped folks to understand how to tell stories. We did that for about 5 years, and then our state funding went away. So now the drama begins. How do we continue to do what we're doing with half the money? So everybody's got their own challenges. My solution to the challenge ended up working with New Jersey Network. They were trying to figure out what to do with their public television. Did a lot of redesign work there, came back to mind, made some deals with international broadcasters. So we are partners with NHK and with RT, which money comes out of Russia, and with France 24. And each of those has become a very, very popular channel in its own right. But now I'm in this interesting dilemma. I'm really interested in learning and where the intersection hits. Now YouTube is up and running. Now a lot of things have happened that are really beginning to change behaviors, iPads, iPhones, and all that. So what's our next move? Do we simply say, well, we're a public television station, but those really aren't what they were, and we're not a PBS member station, so we're going to have to invent something new, and maybe we'll work with it. It becomes a very complicated, difficult conversation because the structure's not there and the audience behavior isn't there anymore. So we start thinking about, well, what do we want to do? And of course, my answer is I want to work with puppets, right? What other possibility is there? I was thinking, if we could take hard to understand, hard to grasp information and put it into an entertainment format so that we were both educating and informing, that's not a bad starting place. So my touchstone is Sesame Street, that experienced some of the issues that we're facing now as adults in 1967. They did a lot of research to figure out how kids learn, particularly how people who are about 4 years old learn, and they developed a curriculum. And they started developing puppets and music and all sorts of stuff, and it changed the world. They're in 140 countries now, so that's not a bad model. I figured, what could we do on the internet this many years on with adults, and how do we begin to think about how we use all that we've learned about communicating through a screen and push it through in a different way? How do we take on big, important issues? So I decided to learn about the Second Amendment. I'm here to tell you I didn't know a lot about the Second Amendment or personal gun ownership or any of that issue at all. Started digging in and hoped that I could write some sort of a script involving characters, something funny, something illuminating. We ended up taking very much of a Sesame Street type format and started working it through. And what we found is that by lightening up on some issues and really going hard on the data on others and creating maps and creating essays that people could read, as well as pure television and entertainment, we were able to kind of do a 360 about the issue. And it ended up being fun. It ended up being interesting. And we made several more of them. So we started looking at friendship and how it's changed in the 20th versus 21st century. We started looking at whether or not it's ethical, moral, and a good idea to put a little chip inside every kid the way we do with a dog, to make sure we know where it is at any moment in time, which lightens up the parenting thing a little bit. You have to watch a little less carefully. Good idea, not a good idea. But also it introduces a creepiness thing. And of course it introduces the idea of, well, if it's working for kids, why don't we do it with people who are older too? And we start keeping a real careful, close eye on each of us, and the data privacy issue becomes an even more severe question. So we've managed to begin to weave together the ideas of how do you get people's attention, and then how do you keep their attention by having some fun with the issue? And how do you take on the important issues so that you're not doing the day-to-day, moment-to-moment stuff that television news and other forms do reasonably well and do on the internet very well? So we started playing around with what the different possibilities are. And so far, it looks promising. So we're now in the process of preparing an extensive curriculum. We've got a committee that we're putting together to study that curriculum and make sure we're on the right track for the next 5 years. The subject matter I'm finding fascinating. I hope other people will as well, but it goes everywhere from how do we assimilate to how do we evolve to are we graduating enough college students in the United States or not enough? How much money should we be spending on education? Are we concerned about the future of cities, or will they take care of themselves? Important stuff. And at the same time, we're laughing a lot, because if I have a job that doesn't involve A, laughing, and B, somebody who has a Viking cap on their desk, I'm in the wrong place. So I want to make sure that, we keep it crazy and keep having fun with all this, because working in this industry, you certainly get opportunities that you never get anywhere else for laughter and for community service and for combining information and education and all that other good stuff. So it's been a remarkable ride. And I think somebody had asked me if I could just take one moment and say, what was the best thing so far, right? Because I'm hoping there'll be a lot more good times. So a friend who I had hired as associate producer way back in the early pre-MTV days is a fellow named Robert Morton, who you probably remember from the David Letterman shows. He later produced the Letterman show. And we're standing outside in the hallway at NBC where my father had produced Concentration and Studio 6A. Letterman was in 6B, and in the center there's a large hallway. And Robin Williams, who was an old friend of my friend, happened to be out there. He was doing the show that night. So now I'm revealing something. So in high school, we didn't have a high school radio station, and I felt we needed one, so we built one. And it ended up being kind of a real ragtag operation, and the extent of our distribution was the high school cafeteria, and maybe on Mondays and Wednesdays, homeroom announcements. That was it. That was our radio station. But we had 50 people involved, and we had a lot of fun doing it. And that's all Robin Williams needed to start doing a routine. So I'm standing next to him, and there's about 25 people that becomes almost 100 around us. And he more or less hands me the keys and says, "You're going to do the routine, and I'm going to carry you." And for the next 20 minutes, it was like dancing with Fred Astaire. It was just the most wonderful experience. So that's a highlight. And maybe another is standing there on the last day of taping. I had stayed with the Carmen Sandiego show for 4 years. And I'm watching hundreds of people dancing on a map to a song that I had commissioned that became a well-known song. And thinking, this moment will never happen again. I should really record it in my memory and make sure that I don't forget what I'm seeing and that I don't forget what I was a part of. And I did, and I'm really happy about that. And I encourage you guys to do the same. That's a really good place to stop, isn't it? I think so. Thank you. So, did we go through all the time, or?
Tell us a little bit about what you're doing at 35.
So, all right. So along the way, I can give you a bit of that. So we're a local. I want to wind back about 10 years. We're a local station. Not many people are watching. It's pretty clear that local television, in our version of local television, it really isn't going to have much of a future. We're competing against a WHYY. There's also WLVT, which is in the Lehigh Valley. I think you all know that. And there's also New Jersey Networks. There's 4 public television stations in the Philadelphia area and 10 channels coming up because, of all the digital channels. So there's going to be quite a bit of public television. And we've got Comcast in Focus coming up and YouTube and all these other things. So thinking, what do we do? Do we become a high school sports channel? Do we open up a soapbox channel and let anybody talk who wants to? Do we come up with some sort of a joint venture? Do we show foreign films? What do we do? And so I spoke to everybody I knew. I mean, there's just this long, long list of everybody in the industry who might have an answer for me. And we ultimately came up with the idea of doing the learning format, the 5-minute learning format. But we had to define what learning was. So, that sounds easy, but it's not. So I kept making the argument that if you looked at a piece of art that was all white on white paint, and if somebody knows modern art, they'll name the painting for me. And if you point a camera on that and do a little bit of explaining, maybe 3 sentences, does that justify 5 minutes of television? Or do you have to go to the Democratic National Convention and interview everybody and pack it into 5 minutes? Is that learning? And we kept going back and forth through all these examples of what learning might be. And that's one of my experiences that taught me that it's the process, not the end product, often. You really need to go through the arguments. You need to go through the office fights. You need to make it 7 different ways and figure out what is it that the audience is responding to and what are they hating. And where might you have some potential, and how do you start pushing in a direction that begins to make some sense? And do you have the right people on the bus? Are the right people arguing with you, or are you arguing with people who really don't know how to make it or do it or whatever? So that's been an interesting process, just trying to figure out what Channel 35 would be, that then became not only a Philadelphia operation, but also a New York operation. So we had about 10% of the country doing the Mind format, and then I began to realize that things were changing again. And that's probably the big message here, is nothing's staying the same anymore. The era of my father doing 15 years of a show on NBC, gosh, to have that kind of a run. But now I've been at this job for 10 years, so I'm a little confused. We've reinvented, but maybe there is some sort of stability in it. Maybe it changes like the wind, and maybe you got to be prepared for either. That's the business we're in.
To talk next about local television, and there's a kind of a funny story I'd like to share with you about local television. Our next speaker and I met over 30 years ago, and he came out to Mullica Hill, New Jersey, to cover a story about two little albino rats. And we were trying to determine in this science class whether if you fed a rat good, healthy food versus a rat in another cage who ate sugary food and all he wanted to eat, who would do better? So as it turned out, Terry Ruggles came out, covered the story, and the rat that ate the most unhealthy food died after Terry left, and he choked on a saltine cracker. So that's my memory that goes back over 30 years when Terry Ruggles first came to Channel 10. And he recently retired. He's been reporting, as I said, stories for over 30 years. In 2004, he was promoted to co-anchor of NBC 10 News Today, and he joined the morning news team with co-anchor Dawn Timoney and meteorologist Bill Henley. He replaced longtime colleague and news anchor Steve Levy. In his long tenure in the Philadelphia market, he covered a variety of stories, including stories about rats, local politics, the infamous MOVE event, the 9/11 tragedy. He traveled to England, Germany, Haiti, Saudi Arabia to get the local angles to international stories. After his tour of duty in the Army, Terry began his television career at WFRV-TV in Green Bay, Wisconsin. He reported news and sports. In 1972, he joined WZZM-TV in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where he co-anchored the news and hosted a weekly news program. Terry graduated from Ohio State University with a degree in education. He and his wife, Mary Jane, reside in South Jersey and are parents to 2 children. So here's Terry Ruggles.
Jerry called and said, we're having kind of a potpourri, and we'd like you just to share some of your snow experiences, because that's how I made my bones doing snow for so many years. Before I get into that, though, I've been here 40 years, and lucky is the person who can work in one market for 40 years. But just in all due respect, I grew up watching some of you. Used to watch Billy Kelly dance. Mike Nice and I would be on the street together, either fighting for stories or production stuff. I watched Dick Kearney here win a national Emmy for what a good photographer he was. And I was at more than one meeting when Les Wass walked in late. So it's just good to be with all of you. Before I talk about snow, because we can wrap that up in just a few minutes. Oh, I also worked with Valerie over here. She did great police stuff, but before she did great police stuff, she did great Sheila Allen stuff. Sheila Allen and Valerie would get together, and they would put into 2 minutes some of the most entertaining, fascinating stories that were on Philadelphia television. But to our guest here, the dean, who's brand new from Seattle, I wanted to bring up a couple things because I thought some of his reflections were good and kind of ironic. And this is nothing to do with snow, but after the 2000 Republican National Convention, our friend Merrill Levitz over at the Visitors and Convention Bureau launched a survey of the people who went back to San Diego, the people who went back to Santa Fe, the people who went back to Keokuk, and what did they like about Philadelphia? Well, Dave, the 2 things that they remember the most were, 1, the Reading Terminal. I get that. And 2, how clean the city was. So maybe with the Democrats coming in 18 months, we can get back to where you think it should be again. And I agree with you, 100%. I was fascinated over here seeing a piece of history. I mean, we all grew up watching what this man created, or had our kids grow up on our knees watching what this man created. But he was talking about the quiz shows. And I wanted to share with you my story about Merv Griffin, if I could. It has nothing to do with snow, but it's a little truncated here. Raise your hand if you know Dave Neal, Dave Gomberg. How many know Dave Gomberg? Maybe half the room. So I'm a reporter at Channel 10 in 1978. And the casino was opening in Atlantic City. And of course, while we take them all for granted now, that was the first one outside the state of Nevada. And it was a big deal. The first piece of luggage that went in, the first hamburger that was served, the first dice that were rolled by Steve Lawrence. So they say, listen, Steve Lawrence is going to be our entertainment act, and we can have you all in for a rehearsal. Well, the whole world media-wise was there, not only the local press, not only the national press, but the European press. I figure, how am I going to get my question into Steve Lawrence as the premier singer? And you can have 10 minutes to talk to Mr. Lawrence. There are 300 reporters with their cameras in this audience. And Dave Neal says, ask him about Chubbies. They said, what? He said, ask him about Chubbies. Well, another question. How many here remember what Chubbies was? 4, 5. Chubbies was a nightclub in Camden. And that's where Steve Lawrence would come out of New York City to practice his craft. So play it forward to Merv Griffin. There's the connection here. 15 years later, Merv Griffin owns the Resorts International. He's going to have a 15-year reunion. So he has buxom women out on the boardwalk. He has a big roulette wheel. He's got a big crap table, and he's got Steve Lawrence back. So things are really rolling at Resorts, as you know they did for so many years, and they have a huge luncheon, 3 times bigger in this room, and there's a press table. And Steve Lawrence and Merv Griffin go walking by. I go, watch this. They go by and go, tell me about Chubbies. He stops. He talks to me for another 10 minutes. They hated me again. But I had my little thing. Want to talk about the big things Dave was talking about coming to town and how we're on a roll. The Pope came to town in 1979. It was a big deal. It was a very big deal. So we go down to the Archdiocese headquarters, and there's this big long table, and I don't know if you remember Cardinal Kroll or not, but Cardinal Kroll, as he announces the Pope is coming, and it's like 4 o'clock, and I've got to get back with a good story. And how is Terry Ruggles going to get that one question through that everybody remembers? Well, I'm just a humble Presbyterian. I know nothing about Catholicism. I raise my hand and I say, sir, I know that you're Polish and you served on the College of Cardinals together. I said, how does one shoot the bull with the Pope? He dresses me down in front of 40 of my colleagues, and it's that kind of embarrassment where your stomach turns and you start perspiring under your arms. And I start thinking of, after about a minute and a half of embarrassment, wait a minute, this is a valid question. Maybe the Presbyterian hasn't asked it right, but it's a valid question. So I go back and I lean on Bill Baldini's shoulder. Bill Baldini and I sat next to each other for 33 years. And I explained what happened. He says, oh, the Cardinal must have misunderstood you. So the next day he goes out, he comes back, he says, boy, you really pissed off the Cardinal. So what? He says, well, I went down to do that very same story, and he says, Terry Ruggles, he should be fired. He's just an embarrassment to his profession. You people CBS should get rid of him. Whew, okay. I don't think anything about it other than I'm embarrassed to know I can't talk to the Cardinal. So the next week, I meet Dick Sheeran and Jim Hickey on the street. Dick Sheeran was with KYW. Jim Hickey, who's now with ABC Radio, was with KYW. He says, boy, you really pissed off the Cardinal. I said, what'd I do? He said, well, we had a half-an-hour broadcast last week announcing to everyone, one of those public service shows like they do on Sunday, but they did it on Friday night. And every time Dick Sheeran would ask a question, Cardinal Kroll would answer it. And every time that Jim Hickey would ask a question, the Cardinal would look back at Dick Sheeran. So after the broadcast is over, they say, Your Eminence, what happened? Were the lights in your eyes? Was there something the matter? He says, you wouldn't answer Jim Hickey's questions. He says, Jim Hickey, I thought that was Terry Ruggles. So we go on, and as you remember, there was 1 million people on Broad Street. There was 1 million people on the Parkway when the Pope came. It was a big, big deal. And we got a tip that the Cardinal and the Pope were going to come to the 6th floor Children's Hospital, as you may know, is the oncology ward. It's where all the babies with cancer go at Children's Hospital. We were the only ones that knew. So we go down there. My friend Baldini is at 5th and Girard at Bishop Newman's resting place there, and it's just mobbed, and the Pope is running 40 minutes late. So I'm with Shirley Bonham, who Dory would know who Shirley Bonham was. She was Director of Public Relations for a Children's Hospital. And I say to Shirley, I said, you know, the Pope's not coming up here. How do you know? I says, because there he is. He's 45 minutes late, and he just blessed here. My cameraman says, you know, if you took some of these kids downstairs, he couldn't help but come across the street. I don't think another thing about it. Don't think a thing. I look down about a half an hour later, and here's Shirley Bonham, and she's got kids down there on IVs, kids in gurneys, 2 little kids in a stroller. I bury my press pass in here in my shirt. I go running downstairs. I'm standing there. My cameraman's upstairs. I know I don't have a chance for that. And sure enough, the Pope's henchmen, they're just huge priests, come walking across the street and say, who are you with? And the nurse says, he's with me, and he has leukemia. So they keep coming across, and I'm standing next to Billy Daly. And Billy Daly's on an IV, and he's about 12. He's from Northeast Philadelphia with freckles and cancer. And this henchman comes across, says, who are you with? I said, he's with me, and we go walking across the street. And they stick us between the velvet ropes and the sawhorses with the crowd. And we're standing there, and the door is open, and live by the cross. You know, they all come proceeding out, and the Pope comes out, and sure enough, he comes right to our little group of people, and he starts blessing these kids. And he's blessing this one and that one, and he blesses Jimmy Daly. And there's a nurse standing next to me who has 2 not wheelchair-bound, but the little stroller-bound kids. And so the nurse hands one to Pope John Paul II, but she's got her hands full. So I pick up the second one, and I hand this baby to Pope John Paul II. And I look over my shoulder, and guess who's standing right next to the Pope? Cardinal Kroll. It was really sweet justice. The Cardinal and I did not speak to each other for 4 years, and finally we were the only 2 people at a taxi stand, and the Presbyterian and the Catholic talked. All right, let's talk about snow or lack of it or what's happened. Now, most of us in this room are old enough to remember when it was news and weather and sports. Well, it's not anymore, because now weather is news. And sometimes it's the top of the news. And there's an entire channel dedicated to the weather news. And cable, of course, is the big culprit. Most of us grew up when there were 3 stations and the U's. No offense, Bob. Okay? And we watched those 3 stations, 3, 6, and 10. Or if you're in Cleveland, it was 8, 5, and 3. Or if you're in St. Louis, it was something else. So the game wasn't as big. But all of a sudden, you know about this proliferation because a lot of us have worked around in the proliferation, and all of a sudden, they decided that weather was news. When I worked in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which was my job before here, we led with news because we were a poor news station, and we thought that this was another gimmick we could use. So we've proliferated, and we also have the contest now, just like who is first with the story, who breaks it, who's got it first. In my mind, what we've done is and I don't mean to bite the hand that fed me because I worked with Herb Clark for 5 years as a weather reader. I wasn't a meteorologist at Channel 10, but I did for 5 years. So I'm not biting the hand that fed me, but it seems to me that we now work on our anxieties. We now, and of course you hear it on KY Radio. You hear it on Channel 10, 6, 3, 29, and every other station because they know that you're interested. And they know that you're anxious. And of course, we hear it hour after hour after hour. I think it's a broadcasting sin, but it's a broadcasting reality. And I don't see it getting any better. I think, if anything, it's going to become more acute. I don't know how many of you remember, or if you were here, when John Bolaris literally shut down the school system of Philadelphia or caused the superintendent of schools to shut down both the Catholic school system and the Philadelphia public school system. Businesses were closed, and we got nary a flake. We got nary a flake. People lost millions of dollars. Kids lost hours of learning because we've become so sensitized to this. I don't have an answer for you, ladies and gentlemen, but I do know this. I get more notoriety, or used to, standing outside in the snow with a yardstick and saying, hey, we've got 3 inches. Hey, an hour has passed, we got 4 inches. And here's what you do. Here's what the smart reporters in any station do. You find yourself a place where there's a Wawa or a diner because you've got to have coffee, and in the cold, you've got to get rid of that coffee pretty doggone quick. It just goes through you like a bad habit. I live in Jersey, but I covered everything or every aspect of the Delaware Valley. But I had this great place. I don't know how many of you know New Jersey, but there's a place called Haddon Avenue and Cuthbert Road. And on Haddon Avenue and Cuthbert Road, I can stand here and say, right here behind me in Collingswood, and I can turn the camera on and say, back here in Westmont, it's snowing really hard. And I can turn the camera this way and say, Haddon Heights has snow just coming out of their ears. And I do it all from one spot. And there's a Wawa there, and it's got hot coffee and sandwiches, and they let me use the restroom. As you know, if you watch any of the morning newses, they bang on the drum viciously. And I got a kick the other day. I watch everybody now. I just used to watch Channel 10 because I was a homer, but I watch everybody now. And I'm watching Channel 6, and I know that the storm is coming, and they announced that Channel 6 is not going to start at 4:30, or 4:30. It's going to start at 4 o'clock. So at 6 o'clock, I switch over to see how Channel 10 does the news. And they announced that our morning team is not going to start at 4:30 or 4 o'clock. They're starting at 3 o'clock. Well, come on, ladies and gentlemen. This is a game of chicken. This is just a game, and we are the chickens who are watching these people play chicken. So I don't have an answer for you. I do know that we've had some great snowstorms here, nothing like Boston, but we've had some great stuff. I've stood in 26 inches, 29 inches. You know what happens there. But it comes and goes. I'll say one more thing, and this has to do with either weather or Brian Williams or anybody who's a journalist. When I was in the Army, I had a drill sergeant who had this motto that just remember this: one aw shit wipes out 100 attaboys. And you can get it right 99% of the time, and whether it's a weather forecast or telling a story about, where you were, or just do it at that one aw shit. Everybody remembers the one mistake you made. Everybody doesn't remember 2 inches, they remember, oh, we're going to have 6 inches. Everybody doesn't remember it's going to be 15 to 0 degrees, they remember the 0 degrees. We're creatures of habit. So, I'm cutting into Valerie's time, but you knew I was going to cut in your time, didn't you? Okay. So let me get up. I didn't mean to ramble on, but there's not that much to talk about weather, and I really like that story about the Pope and Merv Griffin. So thank you, but it's good being with all of you, and I'll see you next luncheon.
There is an incredible coincidence between the next speaker and me. I don't know whether you know this, Valerie, or you've read it.
No, she's a psychic.
Oh, is that it? Well, the truth be told, I have Valerie to thank for the biggest client I ever had after I left the newspaper business and went into a business called public relations, and I became a publicist. And the client I had, and it can now be told, was a man by the name of Bipin Shah. Bipin Shah was a multi-millionaire banker, Core States Bank. And his wife, Ellen Dever, left him. It was his second wife. She ran off with their 2 daughters to Luzerne, Switzerland. Before Mr. Shah hired me to help find his daughters, he hired this lovely lady over here to determine where these kids were. And it turns out that this is one of the few times you didn't get it. You didn't get it. And she gets it 85% of the time, her own words. So he hired me at a very sizable monthly retainer to help find his 2 missing daughters. Before that, the FBI, all kinds of investigators, and we got him on the front cover of Time magazine in 1998, and that turned up his 2 daughters. So Valerie Morrison, she is renowned internationally for her exceptional psychic abilities. This is the psychic that read for Sinatra, reads for presidents, the CIA, the Defense Department, politicians, the stars in Hollywood, the rich and the famous, and the everyday person alike. She's been syndicated on radio and TV for years and in just about every state of the Union. She's also appeared in France, Switzerland, and Egypt. She assists police nationwide and has solved many of the more infamous missing person cases and crimes. This is the psychic that solved the notorious Son of Sam case, and although she claims her rate of accuracy is only 85%, her track record of direct hits, as her late husband Charles put it, is nothing less than astounding. It is this level of accuracy combined with her integrity and ethics that has led her to become one of the most trusted and respected psychics of our time. Valerie Morrison.
Saying earlier, ladies and gentlemen, that at home I'm not used to wearing heels. I buy $8 pajamas and I wear a nice bottom and a nice top, and that's how I see my clients. I love my clients. I would like to say to the young man over here that spoke for his family, my sincere condolences to you. In 1998, I lost my 32-year-old daughter to a horrific drunk driver. Nothing left for us to say. I do want to say to you, though, if you don't mind, that your father is very much with his own father and loved him with all of his heart. And your grandfather would say, "Don't ever touch my truck," whatever that means. You do know what it means. And so he didn't want anyone fooling around with that truck. But he wants to also let you know there are things ahead for two of you as far as jobs are concerned. And they're very good jobs. And you're going to make money with it, even with the economy the way it is. And I just see one of you moving. So if that helps, I think you know what I'm saying. I have never met them before. I love you all. I also wanted to say that my daughter Helen did work with Mr. Nice and went on to learn to fly the helicopter, Channel 10, and with Captain Bill, and a lot of you probably remember Captain Bill. And she asked me if I would go to Diane Allen and get her a job. And I said, a job? A job doing what? You're dancing at a dance party. And she said, no, I want to do sports. And I said, you don't know anything about sports. And she said, watch how fast I learn. You remember that, Michael. Well, that girl was on the news and invited her father and I over to watch her do sports. I never saw so many sports, Temple, this, that, and the real ones and everything. It got me into basketball. I like basketball. I like football. I just adopted a young man, not really, but semi-adopted him because he's very big in football. He's leaving high school now. And I told his father, stop worrying about him now that we're just friends. I said, he's going to be fine. No, he's not going to Temple because I see an umpire or someone holding their hands up like this saying stop. Leave it go. So that made them disappointed. They thought that he wasn't going to get anywhere. Well, he was just accepted to West Point. So that was a biggie, and I'm very proud of him. And I do take in a lot of people. As you saw that all of you speaking here, it was just wonderful being here, and I wanted to thank you so much for the honor of being able to do this. I do want to thank Steve Tatz on WVLT, who did not believe in psychics, and took me on for, this is my 8th year, the first Monday of each month. He's introduced me to a lot of people, and I've met a lot of famous people that I've been with, of course, but I think Tats is my hero over there. Because no matter when I say, I can't come down because it's going to snow. No, can you please let me do 8 months, 8 times a year? That's it. And if you want to fire me, I understand. And well, it's my 8th year, and I'm starting again the first Monday of each month very soon. I I wanted to say hello to just everyone here because I love every one of you, and I enjoyed talking to the young lady over there about the people that are born with a veil. I have been on, it's true, Channel 3, 6, 10, 29. I have done New York television on a monthly basis for a man who is now not there anymore, has passed away. I have done the Maury Povey show for over 10 years and also did it in Washington, D.C. When I was in Washington, D.C. at one particular point, I must tell you something that happened to me. I got a telephone call from the embassy there. It was the Iraqi embassy. Would I come over and read the women? And I said, I can't. You know, I really just changed into my greens because I, along with being who I am, I also can diagnose disease in people, and I take them to a doctor. I have a Civil War house, and I fill it up with people. And my doctor friends say, Valerie, people collect dogs and cats. You collect people. I've just had 3 people that passed away that I've diagnosed with different sorts of diseases that have lived at my home, and my nurses come free, and they're overnight nurses, and they do stay. One is still living there. But when I was in Washington and doing the Maury Povey show at the post office building there, I got a phone call to go to the Iraqi embassy. I said to my daughter, who was with me then, and my husband, I'm not going there. I just put on my greens. We're going home. So my daughter said, please, 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 please. So we ended up going there. We walk into this embassy, and it's like here. Behind there is this man sitting, and there's big glass, and it's very thick. And I stand up and say, excuse me, sir, but I have an appointment here. And I can't wait too long. And he stood up. He must have been 10 feet tall. And I sat down and said, I'll wait. Well, when I went back, I had never read coffee cups. Know nothing about coffee cups. So they had people that were serving with the fez hat on, serving the women. And when we drank it, I thought, you know, I guess you're supposed to chew the grounds on the bottom. And they said, no, no, turn them over, Valerie. My one girlfriend, her father was an ambassador there. And you turn it over, and I didn't know what to do. So I said, and everyone went, And I said, I see it's a big creature. And they all went, And I said, someone's riding on it. Now I'm on a roll, okay? And they're all saying, Okay, so it was a wonderful trip. My girlfriend there had never listened to her father, who was the ambassador. She piloted out of the planes, did everything she did. My son tried to open the door for her. She said, I can get my own door. Back to myself. I was feeling a very bad feeling about President Reagan. So I called my contacts with the CIA and said, President Reagan is going to be shot. And this is where it's going to happen, and this is what I say. They were there, covered him pretty much, as you know. Brady was shot, and President Reagan made it through that. His wife and I had been in touch for many years after that. I don't brag about Valerie, because these are the things I did. Sinatra was a friend to me. How did I meet Sinatra? Through Sid Mark. Sid Mark wanted to meet Sinatra, but you see, the thing is, my father knew Sinatra. And so Sid and I were going over one time, and I said, boy, you're going to see Mr. Sinatra, Mr. S, they called him. And we're on our way over, and a car in front of us blew up. And Sidney said, did you see that? And I said, just go around it. Yeah. So we got there. Sidney got to meet Sinatra, Mr. S. And, of course, you know the story about Sid Mark. He has gone on to play Sinatra, and his song for me was Misty. And not doing everything that I've done as far as I don't brag about it, things that I have done, but I'll tell you the things that I've done. My officer that was sitting there had to leave, unfortunately, because his wife, who's adorable, father was rushed to the hospital. And I don't feel good about it, and I was able to tell him, but I will not tell her. Recently, you might have read in the newspaper that we had 2 missing boys. I'm not going to say names. I don't like to do that. And they got in touch with me. If that's mine, can you turn it off, honey? I'm sorry, thought I did turn it off. So I went looking with this officer. I met him because he had heard about me from the FBI. I worked on the O.J. Simpson case. I can't believe that anyone could ever believe, like that judge, that he could put a pair of leather gloves on top of plastic ones. But he'll get what's coming to him, and I think he's doing that now. The pictures I got from that you would never want to see. I worked on the O.J. Simpson case, and if you remember Susan Smith, she drowned her 3 boys. The FBI contacted me. I work with one FBI agent. I always just pick one to work with and that I trust. And they said, we already went in the lake, Valerie. There's nothing in there. I said, yes, there is. They're in there. They said, it's too dirty. I said, go back in, Dominic. He went back in and found the 3 boys. How I do that is beyond my comprehension. How I can look at these young men and see things, or I can look at someone else and see things. It's, to me, as I heard Terry talking about his religion, it's a God-given gift. I had no father. I was born, he died before I was born. My mother had to work in 2 places. We were very poor. I was raised by a psychic grandfather from Hungary. My grandfather would give readings at night, and of course, when you come here from another country, you have to work in the mines. So he worked in the mines, which eventually did him in, with me by his side and a Bible in my hand. In his readings, I used to sit there playing jacks, and I remember thinking to myself, he's crazy. Why would you tell a woman whose husband's cheating, go home and stir the soup? Why would she make him soup? It all made reasons later in my life. Shut up. Go home and make this work. Keep quiet. Don't say anything. But that didn't come to me till later. He did not want me to do this. My first psychic experience of someone who passed away was when I was probably around 12 years old, before Grandpap got really sick. He taught me the Bible, the Old Testament and the New. And there's one verse in that Bible that I would like to share with you. That in the Old Testament and the New, it's the only verse verbatim. And it says, your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall have dreams. And your young men shall see visions. In Acts and Joel, if you'd like to look it up, it's the only verse verbatim that said that people like myself and all of you that have feelings, listen to your intuition, is how I teach my people. If you feel you shouldn't go to that club tonight, don't go. If you don't want to go down that street, don't do it. I mean, try to listen is how I teach. And when I say teach, I don't teach. I don't go out and teach. And I don't get up like this and speak. I've done colleges. As I said, I've done television. I loved it. I liked getting strangers in the audience and being able to help them. And on Steve Tatt's show, I remember one time a nurse calling in, and an ex-nurse calling in and saying, was probably one he chastised me for, and she said something about her husband and things weren't going well, and I said, well, how's your husband emotionally at 5 in the morning when it comes to you. She said, I don't have time for that. I'm tired. I said, well, let me tell you something, dear. There's a little nurse at the hospital that isn't. And she said, yeah, he's going to have the best night he ever had tonight. So it does help. I've worked on a lot of cases recently, the cases where the 2 boys that were drowned. You probably read about it in the newspaper. I'm not going to say the names. I worked with the rescue teams. You have all the pictures. I walked 10 miles. I intuitively had a dream. And I was on the sofa when my manager, Frank D'Angelo, said that I started to scream, the river turns black where the creek is drying up. I asked the search and rescue to go up 1,500 feet where the creek was running dry, where the young man must have tried to jump from the tracks into the other side of the creek that was drying up, and we found his body. Yes, dear.
I'd like to ask a question. I don't mean to be rude, but
No, you could be rude. It's okay.
I'm wondering this too. I'd like to know about technique, and by that I mean, do you, if we're afraid something happens, we get this fear. I'm assuming that you get feelings like that, but do you see in pictures or do you see in emotion? And if I can ask a follow-up question,
Go ahead.
First question, do you sometimes say things that you didn't know you were going to say, like the creek and
Yes, yes. As I told you about the Bible and what it said about visions and dreams, sometimes it comes in a dream. I'm working with the FBI now on a 10-year case that has to do with the missing couple from South Street. And I said to my detective, you have to work with me, with the FBI. I'll get permission because I only work with one agent at a time that I get close to their family and all. And I said, they're in a freezer. In my dream vision, I call them dream visions. It was not the back of the truck that I thought I saw. I kept thinking that for years, that it was the toll case they were in, or one was in. And then I suddenly, when they told me they were reopening the case, had a dream which showed me a vision of a large freezer, old enough to hold 2 bodies. And I said, it's in the Jersey River. Now, the Jersey River is pretty large, but if I could find the other 2 young men, I guess I could help with that also. That's how I see them. I feel we all have, and we're born with this ability. And that's the important thing for all of you to know. Everyone has this ability. All you have to do is open it up. It doesn't mean getting on your knees and praying or have a Pope or Archbishop slap you around, which I love that story, by the way. And I just believe in all religions. I was raised Catholic by my grandfather, who came from Hungary. But he also, in Hungary, had people who were related. So I think I'm a little mixed up with a lot of things like Judaism and Catholicism. And any religion you are does not matter to me when you're coming to see me for an appointment. What is important to me is, am I going to say to you Elohim, or am I going to say to you God? Because it really doesn't make a difference to me. So to answer that question in a roundabout way, is that it's more like a feeling here, a gut feeling. You just have a feeling, you say, you know, I don't know why, but I'm really worried about my mom today. I'm going to give her a call. And you get somebody that answers the phone and says, Mom was just taken to the hospital. It's nothing really serious, but, you know, do you want to come over? Or you want to come down? You should go to the hospital. Follow that feeling. Follow that intuition, even on the radio and television that you do. You follow the intuition. What is your first answer? Don't try to go about it. Too many people that are psychics or claim to be psychics, and I'm not putting anybody down, by the way. My feelings are that they feel you out. Does the initial R mean something to you? Does the initial J mean something to you? Say it. Do you know somebody by the name of Harold? Do you know somebody by the name of James? someone who passed over. You're asking me about that. I just had a man that came to see me yesterday, and you probably read about it in the paper, whose son was crushed by cement. I didn't know that. He called me on the phone and said, I just lost my son. I need to see you. I got him in on a Sunday. I do that sometimes. I don't work on weekends. And I said, why am I feeling on the phone cement? He said, that's what happened. He was crushed to death by cement. You probably read about it or heard about it. I know he's fine now, but could you imagine, and all of you can, raising a child all of your life, and it's your only child. It doesn't matter how many you have, you know, it still hurts. And that child is crushed to death. And the doctors are using all of his organs that's left to help other people. He was always a generous soul, from what his father said. Yes, I have also worked with Clinton, who's very charming, by the way. And I won't lie, I did kiss him, all right? So there. In fact, when I came back from there, my manager said to me, how was he with you? I actually went with some political people to the White House. And I said, oh, he was fine until all these Secret Servicemen surrounded me. And then he spoke in that Southern accent and said, and where do you think you're going, Valerie? And I got a kiss from the president. So I called my husband, and there is a lady or two present here, one. And I said, I was praying on my knees, Charles, because you heard the story about Monica Lewinsky. So let's be a little risque here too, okay? I did, I swear I did. I said I was praying if you hear anything. No, he still calls occasionally when he visits Philadelphia. And my manager picks up the phone and he hears someone say, is Valerie there? And he said, who's calling? He said, just tell her Bill. And I said, I'm not meeting him down there anymore. No, press is out. There's a lot going on right now. I don't need to be involved in anything. So I haven't seen Bill for a while. I'll call him Bill. Besides the cases that I've worked with, this officer that just had to leave because his father-in-law was rushed to the hospital is the only official detective I've ever taken under my wing, such as the one, of course, that I have taken with the FBI. And his name I can give you is Ray Carr. And Ray and I go back a long time and worked with a lot of missing cases, missing people, murder victims, murder cases. The big one that I did work with was the case, of course, as all of you know, the little girl that was murdered by her mother. There was a track star. And I think most of you do remember that. And her name was Shelley Turner. And so the detectives took me to the house, and the mother actually had wanted to see me. I thought she could, you know, throw me off. And the detectives asked me not to go anywhere with the mother, stay in their distance. I went upstairs with the mother, and I saw 2 beds. And I said, this one's Shelley's bed, right? And she said, yes, the candy man took my daughter. The candy man took my baby. And I immediately did not turn into anyone else, ladies and gentlemen, but pretended I did. And I grabbed her by the wrist and said, Mommy, tell them where you put me. And there was a scream. And the detectives came running up. And I told them what I saw, which was a religious centennial place down by the river, the Schuylkill. And they found her body there that night. The mother only got 10 years for shooting her daughter 6 or 7 times, maybe 8. But that's sometimes our system. This young detective, I became very attached to his children and his wife. And I call him Columbo, by the way, because I'll say something, and he'll walk away like this. I'll say, you know, wait a minute. I wanted to ask you about that. It's always that Columbo thing. So that's my nickname for him, Columbo. And he was going to speak to you today. And do you know what he was going to say? I don't know this woman. She's crazy. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to do that. I've never talked to her before. With all the people that I've worked with in radio and television, Diane Allen, who I love very, very much, spent a lot of days at my house with my husband. Jessica Savage, who I'll always remember, and tried to warn against some of the people that she was seeing or was with. One night, my husband started intercoming for help. Jessica Savage, Diane Allen, and myself ran upstairs to my husband's bedroom. He was having a heart attack. Jessica loosened his top. Diane loosened his belt. We got the ambulance. They saved my husband with me as I was dialing the phone. So you see, what I want to explain to you young men over there, and anyone in this room that's ever lost anyone, you've never really lost anyone. You miss them. The physical presence is not there. But the presence of their spirit is there now and will forever be guiding you. And if it's a wife, she's still there. And it doesn't matter if a man marries again or goes with someone else. The idea of that is the fact she blesses you because she doesn't want you to be alone. Life is uncertain. All of us know that we have the possibility of not being here tomorrow. I'm not Valerie Morrison, the radio personality, the television personality, the police finder with people. I'm your Valerie Morrison. I'm the one that's going to stand up there and help anyone I can. And all this infamous things that I've done, all of them that I've done, I remember, thank you for what you told me, and also being in Washington, D.C. gave me the privilege of meeting a man that you would know the name of that wrote in the newspaper there. And he had a bicycle all the time. You remember who it was. And we became very, very good friends. And he's passed away, but he's with me always. In different ways, you could say, well, is she a spiritualist? Is she a psychic? Is she a medium? I don't think you could really say what it is. I think you have to say you intertwined it all. I don't know myself how I can say a name, and it turns out that it may be a very unusual name, like Troy or something like that. How could someone look at me and say, oh, that's my son's name, or was my son's name? I recently had a boy, and I don't want to keep you. I recently had a woman and a man that called me up and said, my son just killed himself, right in the Roxborough area. Could you see us, please? And Sunday, I was off. I said, come over right now. I didn't take them in the office. I put them in the front room where they could be comfortable. He had written a letter to his mother saying it was all her fault that he killed himself because of the way she treated him and the way she always put him down. Now that's got to be really very hard. She was crying a lot. She said he stole a train, a set of trains to buy that gun. I said, no, he didn't. He took 2 sets of trains, which made it right. He did. He took his brother's train, she told me. I looked at the pictures of her other 3 boys, and I said, this boy, stop what you're doing to him, or you're going to end up with the same thing. He couldn't be more than 7 or 8. The husband was crying, she was crying. She said, but it was his train he took, and he's always getting into a problem. Well, recently she sent me 24 roses and a nice card. And you can't get the number where someone sends you something, but they did tell her to call me. They did call me. And I thanked them for the flowers. And I said, how's Georgie? That's the name of the young boy. She said, he's always in trouble. He's always getting me upset. And I said, there you go again. I ask you not to do that. And you're doing it all over again. So if you're going to call me in 10 years because Georgie's dead, maybe you should see someone else. So I am firm, as you know. And I say it the way it is. I'm going to tell it the way it is. And if anyone has any other questions, ask me. No? I just wanted to say thank you so much. Thank you, Jerry, for having me here and for letting me speak. And I see so many familiar faces. I love you all. God bless you.